Hi everybody. So today we have Claudine Arendt, a Luxembourgish artist based in Amsterdam. She performs and exhibits in public spaces and has presented at science and ceramics conferences and collaborates with the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. She was awarded the Stipendium for Emerging Artists by Mondrian Fons, has stayed in residence at European Ceramics Works Center and ISPC and installed a fountain sculpture at Aurora. My French is so bad. Aurora National de, I took French, I should do this. C'est quoi grande Duchess Charlotte.
Yes.
And she received her BFA from Jean Reveld Academy and an MA in European Film and Media Studies from the Bos University Weimar. She currently has her studio in Het Domain. I probably butchered all of those things, but all of this is just to say we're super lucky to have her, amazing ceramic artist. And without further ado, take it away.
Thanks a lot for the introduction. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen. And I thought, so I'm mainly going to talk about the ceramic. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'm mainly going to talk about the ceramic works, but I thought it would be nice to show some of my other works to give a little bit of context of what I do, because they don't really look the same, but they are often made with like the same spirit or the same method. So I'm just going to run through that, and then we can always come back to them later if there's any questions. So this is an older work from 2018, and I enjoy when sculptures are made kind of seemingly with ease. So if it's sort of just one gesture that makes a sculpture. So in this case, it's just an old woolen blanket of my grandma that I threw over a shape to make this poor market woman. And this is from the same installation, and I was selected for the show, but there wasn't really a budget to make anything, and I had imagined to build like a larger tower. So then I just used all the plinths that the gallery owned to build this sort of skyscraper. So this is like 4.5 meters high. That's, I think, a little bit over 14.5 foot. And so it's just I enjoy being able to build this giant legitimation, because the plinth is already, you know, giving authority, and then I just pile them up one on top of the other, but then without having any budget to do so. Then this is some other work, also older, from 2017. And it's like a brick wall ghost that is floating through the space. So I was on the inside on roller skates and just moving in a way that that it kind of seems to really float through the space. And I've been hiding in more sculptures. So this is like a giant cocoon. I made it when I was wondering where artists are emerging from, if they're called emerging artists. So I was on the inside, and I just see it as like a pencil sketch, you know, just the foam stripes as just these sketchy pencils that you then, you know, later develop into something else. I also like to work in public space because it has, less of a curated audience. And here I was also on the inside of the sculpture and moving it and like lifting the head up and down. And on the outside, there was somebody telling stories about metamorphosis. And sometimes people would get this little nest or egg, and that was made from sculpting wax, which becomes soft with body temperature. So you can sort of hatch the egg with your hands. And then there's a story on the inside about metamorphosis. This is also during a public space festival, art in public space festival, It's a rolling sculpture made from paper mache and epoxy, so it's really light and stable. And the title was "This is not art." So I put out the sculpture on its own, and the curators were following it with the camera. Yeah, to put up the debate of kind of ownership in public space, and then children mainly took it to play with it. Yeah, and then this is one of the bigger works and more recent. There was an open call to make a work about COVID, so I proposed a sneezing sculpture. So there is a motion sensor, so if you get too close, then it sends a signal to a little computer that then sets off a randomized intervals of spraying water. And so it's on the left-hand side, like big noses with the mouse, and on the right-hand side also a nose that has a green mask, and like the head covers the eyes and like a horse leg. So that's the health worker that's kind of riding against this wave. So it was supposed to be a kind of a joyful moment for after the pandemic, and a monument to like this boldness of the health workers that went into the unknown, basically. And then next is the project that I'm mainly going to talk about. That's the collaboration with an underwater acoustician called Sven Gastauer. And I'm also really briefly going to talk about what his work is, and then how the porcelain kind of adds to that project. Sven is an underwater acoustician, and he's been part of the Zooglider project at Scripps in San Diego since having worked there. And so the Omen Lab researches plankton and has built this autonomous underwater robot called Zooglider. It is designed in a way that it can record zooplankton without disturbing or destroying it. And here you can see it has a camera system that is here on the right-hand side. And this orange tray is where the zooplankton kind of floats through, and then there's a red LED light, and the animals cast a shadow, and that shadow is recorded. So those images, they are called shadow graphs. And they provide new behavioral insights and new insights into physiology. Because with other methods, when they're just scooped up with nets, then these really fine tentacles are destroyed, and it wasn't known that they were there. And of course, if you take them out of their environment, they're not really behaving as they usually do. Here's just a collection of very pretty zooplankton. And they use passive acoustics, so hydrophones, to listen to the environment, and they also use active acoustics, which is what Sven is involved in. And so his research is, he developed these models where if you send a sound wave into the water, what the expected target strength, so the expected echo from each individual can then tell you what you're looking at, basically. So it's a way of seeing in the data that comes back from sending out sound waves, what animals are there. Is there one krill? Are there many krill? Or whatever else you're looking at. So that is his part, and then we will change perspective. Because my perspective is one that is very far away from this world of research and this world of zooplankton. So in this project, I was mainly interested on how to get this zooplankton really close by again. Because if you're not involved in research, then zooplankton is really hard to experience, to see. It's practically invisible. And so if you imagine yourself standing on the beach and you look at the ocean, like all you see is just the surface, and then you enter the water. And once you're underwater, the senses, they don't work that well anymore. Like you see blurry and you hear muffled. And so from that moment on, to see a little or to experience anything more, you need technology. And so maybe you use a mask to see clearer, or you use fins to dive deeper, but that doesn't get you that far. So yeah, when I look at Zooglider, then I see it as a wide cane that collects the sensory information in an environment where our senses don't work. And I saw, so the project basically started when I was seeing those shadow graphs, and I was, yeah, I was just struck by their beauty, but not only the beauty of these animals, but also just like what the visual qualities of the photographs communicate. So you see that the tentacles are kind of like suspended in water, the animals are drifting by. They're off center, so you can see that it's just a moment that has been recorded. So you know you're peeking at something that is by in the next, that has passed in the next moment, and these animals, they continue into the unknown. So I imagined that you should be able to actually hold these images in your hand. So they are so fleeting, and this fleetingness makes them beautiful, so you should be able to hold on to them. And I thought that should be possible to do that in a, you know, in a cozy context, so like on your couch at home. But I hadn't worked with ceramics before. So making a ceramic cup, or let alone a plate, was a little bit of a challenge. So we first tried to copy existing objects by just taking glass and sticking it into plaster and trying to get it out again to then have a mold. That was semi successful. So a lot of the glass got stuck, we spilled a lot of plaster. And at some point I got a little bit frustrated, and I thought if at least we could 3D print the object that we're going to stick into plaster, then we could try again if it fails. But then the next problem was that I didn't really know how to do a 3D drawing. So, but then I thought, well, if I draw a line in 3D, it's just numbers lined up. And then I thought the opposite should be possible as well. And then Sven was still in home office, so then I could ask him if we can use his acoustic algorithms and translate them into coffee cups. So that's where both both our works were meeting. So this is what you saw earlier. That's how his work translates into mine. So on the top left, you see krill, and the shape is simplified to be able to model the echo that is coming back. And then on the left-hand side, you see simulations. On the bottom, you see the frequency from 200 to 1000, which is what Zooglider is using. And on the y-axis, you see the rotation of the animal, because if you imagine sending a sound wave against a big belly, more energy is going to come back than if you send a sound wave against just a tiny little head. So that influences the echo that comes back. And so does the frequency, where the lower frequency gives you, you can see further and bigger objects, and the higher frequency, you can see more detail. And so we take all of these simulations and map them into a coordinate system, just X, Y, and Z, to get the 3D object and project it in a way that it forms a cup or a bowl. This illustrates how the rotation of the animal influences the shape of the cup. So this is a coffee cup from above. Yeah, you see that the waves change because that is depending on how the animal is rotated, the echo changes. And then the frequency is from bottom to top. So it goes from low frequency at 200 to a higher frequency at 1000. And you can see it back in the shape that at the lower frequency, you see like further and bigger shapes, and it gets more detailed at the top. And then further down the road, we now have software with a graphic user interface. So we can just pick from the drop-down menu the species. So here you see copypod and choose the radius and the height. And then on the right-hand side, you see the object as a point cloud, which we then later translate into an STL file, which is triangles forming the 3D object. And then if I then choose the medusa from the drop-down menu and enter a different height, I get a different object. And this is krill. So it just makes it easier to play around with the shapes. And then, so from there, from this point cloud, we get a 3D file. It's an STL file, so that's just the surface, and that can be produced. So the first one, the prototype, we 3D printed, and this was around the time that I was heading to the south of the Netherlands to do a ceramics residency at EKWC. So I took this as a side project and then made the first mold. And so we also 3D printed it there with using half a cup. And you can see here in the image that I left these traces of the filament of the 3D printer. You can take them away to make it smooth, and I just left them. And then I fired the first ones. And when I took them out of the kiln, I was surprised to see how much they look like seashells. So it became clear that using technology would shape the aesthetics and the meaning of the work. Then I quickly became really interested in CNC milling. So what you're looking at here is just simulations of a milling pass. So this is then a block of cured plaster from which a drill carves out the shape. The milling path, so the path that the drill takes, is calculated by the software. It depends on the parameters that you enter. It also depends from software to software. But so this adds another system of information to the final vessels, because you can, like with the printer filament, you can still see the traces of the drill in the mold and then also in the ceramic object. And because it's a mill that only drills from above, it can't do undercuts. So here is just an image that shows everything in red is an undercut that this drill that comes from above can't reach, and therefore just takes away, because the milling machine, it continues to drill whether something is in the way or not. And so then this is the result of it. So what you see in front of the object is an undercut that has just been chipped away, these lines in the front. So you have the wave shape that is defined by the algorithm that tells you which species you're looking at with sound. And then the path of the milling machine kind of leaves the traces on the outside, and the physical limitations of the machine that cannot do all of the undercuts leave the traces where it's just chipping it away. This is what another such one of these molds looks like. And here you can also see some traces of the production process, which is it's made from a low resolution file. So what you see here on the sort of middle right is like if it's pixelated. So So those bigger triangles, they're simply copied into the plaster. And then the next step is to pour the porcelain into the open mold. And so that where it touches the plaster, which is here, it copies the sharp edges. So that's the outside of a plate in this case, and the top gets smoothened out by the porcelain. And so that gives this look of a seashell, which is like this rough outside and this really smooth inside. And I always compare it to if you try to read the water when you have a sharp rock laying at the bottom and you see the softened bump on top, kind of. So this is some of the results of this recent of this process. So this is krill, and you see, yeah, you can see the milling pass, which is just cut a little bit rougher, and then the straight lines where it just took part of the shape away. And here on the right hand side, you can see how the algorithm that decides on which path the drill should take, how it decides that it should do a flat circle in this way for whatever reason. And in the middle, you can see that the waves on top, they're part of the acoustic waves, and then everything that is straightened out is part of this physical limitation of the machine where it can't reach the undercut, so it's just taking them away. Yeah, so for me, this project is really about bringing this far away, sort of invisible, not perceptible zooplankton really close and make it experienceable. And they are objects of use. They're glazed, so you can eat from them. And that makes it also, you know, you can get it, you can actually, you know, hold it in your hands and drink from it and eat from it. And then one of the things with it is because it's a reproducible object, it's made from molds. So in theory, it can be reproduced endlessly, which is not good when you're an artist, of course. So I thought, I wanted like a machine that can make them unique again. So this is what in science they would refer to as a CTD. It collects salinity and temperature and chlorophyll, I think. But I asked Sven to strap some of our cups to it. Because now there's only 3 cups that have been in the North Norwegian Sea and sent down to minus 1900 meters. And so they are unique again. I think of it as like a charger for aura. Yeah, we filmed it, of course, with a GoPro. So yeah, that's the presentation that I've prepared for today. And I thought there might be questions about maybe the process of making ceramics or other questions. Yeah, and we can, the video takes a minute or so and it just turns black really quick, and then there's not much more to see than that because, you know, you can't see anything.
Well, thank you. I have some questions. This
Yeah.
is amazing, but I want to like let everyone else. I'll let everyone else ask first, and then I'll start getting into it. So, does anyone else have any questions? Okay, I'll start with mine while people are thinking. Yeah, I was just I was thinking a lot about how you incorporate like aspects of the limitations of the scientific process into your art, kind of, right? Like you're saying like, oh, this is like a limit of where technology couldn't do it, like couldn't accurately like kind of represent what is there. Is that like intentional? Like it seems like you yeah, you like what are your thoughts on like representing in art like limitations of these technologies and stuff like that?
Yeah, yeah, it's it's a little bit how I work, is just like looking that during making what actually happens, you know, what does the material communicate anyway? And I think that, so it's not that I think in advance, oh, I should, you know, make a critique of technology only shows us half the picture or something like that. But while producing these things kind of show up. So you see the lines of the 3D printer, and then you suddenly think, oh yeah, that you know, it becomes interesting. And then the milling, of course, because on one hand it's so limited because it can only drill from above. For ceramics, it's really handy because that means you can always get your object out of the mold again because there are no undercuts. And then, of course, looking at it later, it is what the project becomes, because the zooplankton is so like difficult to study. It's this whole oceanography. I'm always thinking, like when I listen to Sven talk about his work, I'm always most interested in all the vehicles that they have to invent and build to get out there and find out anything. So that is part of that. You can't really see anything in the ocean without using the technology. So that's kind of how it falls together in the end.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because something that we're really talking about in this workshop is like how to communicate the process of science to an audience, you know, because we all have our various versions of this, right? Where we're like studying things that are microscopic or macroscopic, that we need technology and like such indirect like ways of seeing, right? So it's it's really cool. And if you have any other like comments on just like thinking about like revealing the process in your work, because I think that seems like something you do a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about the images of Zooglider, for instance, it's like, you know, then I'm most interested in what does it communicate without looking at which animal it is, which is, you know, what then researchers would be interested in, but looking at the visual qualities and what does it communicate apart from that. And yeah, with the shadow graphs, it's so special because they just become so incredibly beautiful, which is also part of the message, right? That there's this world out there that I don't know, that is so weird that you should look at it and be happy to be alive to kind of be able to witness this. That's how I see them. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. So Claire has a question. They ask, how did you find the experience of learning these various software tools versus the ceramic training?
Yeah, I kind of just fought my way through it. I had started, the first time I worked with 3D was with the fountain, where I made a small model just from like sort of children's clay, and then we 3D scanned it and produced a large sculpture from it. So I had I didn't have any experience in 3D, it's not really it really the ceramics and more technical things really went one in one, because the project used both. So yeah.
Any other? I'll ask another question then while other people are thinking more. I guess I was just wondering, like, how was your experience as an artist, like working with scientists, and do you feel like that you were like kind of playing the role of like illuminating the meaning behind it, or do you think that like all the scientists too like thought what they were doing was like really like meaningful and beautiful, like in the way that you talk about, and you were like kind of capturing that?
when I ask the scientists of what they think about the project, they like this different perspective on it, because that's of course not at all what they are thinking about. So one is that to sort of visualize this acoustics, and that you can actually hold them and see how the waves look like, is also something they haven't really used before. So it's kind of handy to use it to talk about acoustics, and of course like the communication that reaches a different audience is also interesting, because that is, if you know somebody in research, then it all seems fairly normal, but as soon as you're on the outside, you don't really know about this, not about the gliders and whatever microscopes and photographs, and so that is, I guess, it also for them just helps communication, but next to then the art related story. And I think they don't see the zooglider as like a white cane sampling an environment where sensors don't work. So this perspective is then added.
It makes a lot of sense. It's so interesting. Okay, cool. We have another question from Nora. Do you have a favorite memory of the public interacting with your art? And to add on to that, like, can you talk more about like all of your public interfaces with your art, or as much as you want?
Let's see. I mean, once people have their coffee cup, I don't know what they're doing with it. So that's it. It was part of the project to give that away, to make it not an art object that you can only see at a certain spot, but for some time, not anymore. I sold them, and people can now, some, I think, drink their coffee every morning from it and are happy to see it, and others put it sort of as a decoration object somewhere. So that's a little bit out of my control, and so I also don't know. But generally, with the zooplankton porcelain, it's just interesting to most to hear this whole story behind it. So both the story about the research and how that is done about the autonomous underwater robot, and then also how it translates, and that you can actually have a good looking product from it that you can hold. So and so it's compared to my other works that have also this sort of interactive component. It's of course it's a little bit less funny. I always try to suggest that what you could drink from it, like have the big bucket as a sangria party or something like that. And the other works, of course, they look more to be a little bit at odds with expectations, like this brick wall that floats like a ghost, where you don't expect a sculpture to suddenly start moving, or the Corona fountain that sprays water at you when you don't expect it. So so those interactions are a little bit more fun than the ones with the zooplankton.
No, that it's really interesting to hear about like how to make interactive art. I know some of us in this group have talked about, we're having an art show at the end with our pieces and thinking about ways to make it interactive. And so like, any advice you have on like making your piece, like, I guess, like interactive and in an insightful way for them. I mean, you've already touched on like subverting expectations, which I think is really interesting. But then, if you want to talk a little bit more too about your like idea of like ownership with art. Like I know you had that one sculpture that was like going all over the place, and yeah, how you said you were commenting on like yeah, like the ownership of it, like, and then also it seems like even with the cups, right, like now these pieces that are your art, like people own them and stuff. Like I am curious, like kind of like, yeah, what your thoughts are on ownership in art and how you seem to spread it out and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, with the zooplankton project, it was really about making things accessible, and I think that is also can be found back in other works and in different ways because both in science and also maybe in, I don't know if it's also in science communication, but like it's often, you know, sold in a way that, oh, science is really complicated, you have to be super smart, or I don't know, it's somewhere out there. And so yeah, I don't really care for that. So I was specifically looking to make something that is, yeah, it's just a stupid coffee cup and not and not something else. And that was the reason why in the beginning I produced more of them and wanted to, so that they can be coffee cups, because they're not, if there's only one and it stands behind glass in a museum, then it's a vessel made of porcelain. That, but yeah, to make them functional, and by that take away some of the, whatever you want to call it, some of the authority or whatever. Yeah, and this accessibility, I guess, is coming back in works like, yeah, also the COVID fountain that is super colorful and big and squirting, and yeah, breaks down some I don't know. It doesn't try to well, actually that one literally tries to keep you at a distance, but physically and not intellectually. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool to think about. Like, I don't know, just seeing so much of your work, like the form and the material is so important for conveying the idea. And I think that's really cool for us all to see.
Yeah, I think that's where you know, how if you have a material, it also, I always think of it as a sort of collaboration. It already has something to say, and then you kind of have to, you know, work together with it to get the message out. And I think that's the same, you know, what happened with the milling or the 3D printing is like, that's already like there, it's not a material, it's a technology, but it's basically the same. If you start producing and you have something and then you look at it and then you see what it's doing, and then from there you take it, because of course I would not have had the idea to make seashells out of echoes of zooplankton, but once the material gives you the idea, then it works to, yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. It's just another reason to just play with material and see what kinds of ideas emerge through that interaction. Yeah.
Yeah.
So cool. Does anyone else have any questions about this project or any of the other ones we got to see in the beginning? Give it a couple minutes. Okay, let's see. James is looking at your website and considering buying some of these little zooplanktons. Me too. It's so cool. I love the idea that like everyone can hold it. I love that concept of just like its preciousness, that you want like everyone to hold it in their hands because it's so fleeting and hard to see, and I love that. Yeah, any other questions? I see the comments. I'm trying to think. I thought I had one more. I seem to remember it. No? Okay. Well, I don't know. I guess we can end here. I don't know if you have any last parting advice for scientists trying to do art.
um, yeah, no, yeah, only to work with the material and find out in the process, and like make before trying before the ideas come while making, basically.
Yeah.
Or I guess that's, I think, typical for art, is that instead of like sitting at the desk and trying to figure something out, you start which is, I guess, the same in research. Yeah, if you look it through a microscope, you can't find things out by just thinking about them. You have to actually get into it,
I actually remembered my question. I was curious about your whole like process of becoming an artist, kind of, and I know some other people always want to hear like the journey of the speaker, like how they came to be where they are. So if you could just like talk about kind of like your process, how it is like applying for our residencies, and like all the different ways like you've kind of like started these various collaborations, just kind of your journey. That would be really cool for us all. I don't think we get to talk to artists very much, so it's nice.
I just started making stuff when I was a teenager. I was welding old metal together to make weird looking sculptures, and then spent some years in art schools. And basically the years, maybe 3 years after graduating, were really hard, I would say. With writing many proposals and only getting negative replies. And then I think then the only thing to do, and that's basically the same, is to keep making stuff and find things along the way. And that is the same as this collaboration has started, which is actually just because we wanted to make sort of souvenir cups for scientists, and then it just develops into something else along the way. The ceramic residency I had heard about and applied, and that really changed also my practice from making works with a lot of just ready-made materials, where what I was mainly talking about is like working together with the material, finding this woolen blanket and then turning it into a market woman, or finding this foam and turning it into a big cocoon. And the ceramics basically changed my practice in the way that I have to plan a little bit more in advance. So because with ceramics you also can, but it's just a little bit more difficult to just start building something. You have to kind of know a little bit beforehand what you're doing. So but at the same time, as I said earlier, the technology that I added to it, I also treat it the same way as I treat material. So then that is then also not that different after all. But basically it's just I know other people do it differently, but for me it's just a lot of applying for projects, applying for residencies. I'm currently making models to send in a proposal to have a sculpture at a school, and then you never know whether you get it or you get rejected, and then that's how you sort of scramble forward.
That's good to know that it's just like similar to science. It's like write proposals, find things. Are you looking for more like science collaborators? Because I can imagine your whole ceramic thing being like, like a lot of microscopic organisms, right? Like I don't know if you are. We have a network of scientists, so
I was thinking about continuing with the acoustic shaping, making the echoes visible, because of course you can do it, because the way it is modeled is by using a 3D model and then from there calculating the response. So you can basically do it with anything. You can, you know, put the 3D model of a human or building or, you know, a shark or whatever in there and get a response. So I think that is definitely on the sort of future project list. Yeah.
So cool. It'd be so cool to like see like the evolution of life like through like through
Oh
this,
yeah.
you know. So cool. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, which I'm leaving 10 seconds for people to decide if they have any.
I just wanted to say thank you for talking to us, but also for saying how like you need to like work with the materials, because I definitely have been like thinking about my project and like only thinking about it and
Oh yeah.
getting very little, like I'm not getting anywhere with it. And I've been like so afraid to like start working with stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think this is going to be the push that I need to finally just start like sketching
Yeah.
stuff out and like figuring it out.
Yeah, and for me, it's every time again, I always think like, oh, now I know how to do it. And every time again with each new project, I have to go through this phase where everything looks super crap and it falls apart. But meanwhile, oh yeah, that's actually a tip that I got that really also made a difference for me, is like you have to trust that something comes out at the other end. So not to get nervous when everything looks super weird and nothing at all. And then for me, it's often going through, I don't know, a week or two of making ugly stuff, and then it suddenly comes together. So that's maybe good to share, that it's, at least for me, it's normal to have like an awful time and then then it gets better.
That's very encouraging. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think this was like a really amazing talk, just to see like what kinds of things can be produced through these collaborations and how it just really does like help with science communication, and just to hear from an artist. So thank you so much. Everyone's saying it was so interesting and they loved your little cups in the chat. So yeah.
Great. Thank
Good luck
you.
in New York.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Have a good one.